I am Dr. M.N. Chaudhary for your macroeconomics, PG macroeconomics, semester 2. Now today we are going to study inflation, the theory. Actually, inflation is about expansion in simplest terms, but it is not expansion for the PG students, for us. Actually, inflation is both a monetary as well as a non-monetary phenomenon. As far as the monetary aspect, we have all discussed in our previous classes that inflation is about the price inflation. Price contains commodity price as well as factor price. So in commodity market, when there is price rise, this is also a peculiar situation of money inflation or price inflation of especially the goods and services or the commodity market. This is commodity market inflation. Now, let me explain this material aspect of inflation, because this is the primary analysis before entering into the second phase. This first phase, as I have told you earlier, there are two aspects when the analysts have focused. First aspect is the cost inflation. And cost inflation is again the factor cost inflation, because factors of production actually they require money payments from the employers.
Sorry for
And
interruption, sir.
employers, the prices or price inflation may be attached with factor prices or commodity price. If the factor price rises, then it becomes an issue of cost inflation for the employers, because employers have to finalize the price of the commodity, and the price of the commodity contains both the cost of production, that is the cost of different factors of production, including input cost, as well as maintenance cost and the profit share of the employer. So it involves everything together, and then it becomes a price of the commodity. So this is the price inflation actually for the commodity market. The cost of factors of production as well as the cost of the overall input materials all together becomes cost inflation, cost factor. So here this is cost induced. Similarly, there may be profit induced inflation. Profit induced inflation is the situation in which there are the other factors, including wage and other factor costs, remaining constant. Even then, if the employer or the entrepreneur, if he or she wishes to enhance the profit margin, in that case, if there is price rise, that is called profit inflation, profit induced inflation. So this is all about cost inflation. Now the second factor is demand induced inflation. Demand induced, as I told you earlier in my previous classes, that demand, it shows actually the aggregate demand in the economy. When there is aggregate demand, when there is excess demand over supply, and in order to meet the satisfaction of the market, of the consumers, there will be a natural rise in prices due to excess money chasing few goods, as it has been termed by a few economists, and it is famous for that. And in that sense, we can call it that demand inflation is a manifestation of excessive demand in the economy in comparison to the product market or the level of output. If there is excess of monetary flow in the economy, supply of money increases in the economy, and so the purchasing power is enhanced. In that case also, there is a possibility of price inflation, because again I will repeat, excessive flow of money chasing comparatively less goods and materials. In that case, there will be price rise in the economy. Now, this is a monetary aspect of this analysis. Similarly, there is another analysis which is non-monetary. The non-monetary analysis deals with both the cost inflation as well as the demand inflation. But the situation is now different from calling it too much money chasing too few goods. It's not like that. There is no situation of too much money chasing too few goods. And then the concept of non-monetary analysis rises. Here, as I have told you about one figure, the price level and level of employment on the x-axis and annual rate of price rise on the y-axis, and in such a situation, we find a non-monetary analysis of inflation. What happens then? There are three ranges. You will see it in the diagram I distributed earlier. There are three ranges: range 1, range 2, and again range 3. Now I tell you about range 1. Here what happens, the total spending is low. Total spending includes the sum of consumption, investment, and government spending. This is called total spending. This is comparatively low, and the economy is not rich. National output is again low, and the full employment is also not achieved. In this case, the substantial GNP, gross national product, gap exists. There is a gap in the gross national product. Because of why? I again repeat, this is because total spending is less. Similar condition with the output, national output, and national employment level. When there are all these three are less, in that situation, there is a condition of gross national product gap. In this situation, when unemployment rates are high, in this situation, unemployment rates are high, and business has a lot of idle productive capacity. Idle. Why idle? Because it can enlarge the productive capacity, but it has not enlarged. Then an expansion of aggregate demand takes place through foreign debt or through any internal or external flow of money in the economy. If this happens, what will happen then? there will be a rise in output and fall in unemployment rate. You just mark it. If there is, due to any reason, aggregate demand hike, what will be the result? There will be a hike in output level. Similarly, there will be less and less of unemployment rate. In this situation, what happens? This is the stage 1. In this situation, there will be no price rise, and the price level goes almost horizontal in the diagram. And this is so because there are large volumes of idle human and business resources. Human resources are idle because human employment is not full. If there is employment that is not skilled, so there is a chance that there is a rise in skill and rise in the business productivity also. The productive resources, property resources are idle, so that can be better utilized. And in that case, if there is rise in output, if there is less unemployment, it will result into no kind of inflation. The second stage is now important because here we find the economy as a whole rises. Economy as a whole rises, and side by side, the full employment level is now approaching. Similarly, utilization of business or property resources are also almost fulfilled. It is coming to the 100% level of its resources. In that case, what will happen? There will be a slight rise in the price level. It means price level will start rising. And so you will find in the diagram range 2, it shows there is price inflation slowly, and it is just convex to the origin, concave to the origin, to right side, concave to the origin. So you will find here that there is a slight rise in prices, commodity price, and this range 2 is also called premature inflation because the actual inflation is not fully shown. Now, what happens in range 2? Here, the increase in demand by raising supply, the labor markets are full or tightened, causing wage rise. Then what will happen? There will be a condition of wage rise, wage hike in the economy. Similarly, inflation of prices will take place, start taking place, and so there is a curve. And this situation, this range is called premature inflation. This, I again repeat, this is the non-monetary analysis of inflation. Range 3, when there is again further increase in aggregate demand, what happens? Since the full employment level is already achieved, similarly, all the property resources, business resources, plants are already full to the capacity, working full to the capacity. So with every increase in excessive or in every increase in aggregate demand, the exact response will be rise in prices. So the range 3 denotes the level of price rise after full employment and maximum output in the economy. After that, range 3 denotes, it will clearly invite a situation of complete inflation when the inflationary trend will be vertical. So this is the non-monetary aspect of inflation which you can call. Now let me again come to the let me mix up the two, the monetary and the non-monetary. In the monetary analysis, we have described about cost inflation. Now in the non-monetary analysis, again, this cost inflation becomes the market power theory of inflation. So in one angle, what is cost inflation? Cost push inflation. In another angle, this becomes the market power theory. What happens then? Now again, non-monetary analysis tells that in this market power of inflation, we find the situation of growing power of the unions, wage unions or labor unions. Labor unions dominate the market, and especially the industrial sector. In that case, what happens? They start dominating the wage hike situation, and the entrepreneurs have no power to control. And what they do is simply to pass on the hike in the wage cost in the prices, in the price of commodities. So whatever rise they find in wage cost, they simply advance the same to the to be calculated in the price tag. And in this way, there is price rise. In less developed countries like India, what happens? During the planning period, there was a situation when the agriculture as well as industrial sector were very insignificant. So in the first 5-year plan, we saw an emphasis through the 5-year plans, first 5-year plan, emphasis on agricultural production. So that was the emphasis in order to enhance the output in the agricultural sector. Now the second 5-year plan emphasized on what? Industrial sector. It was not merely industrial sector, but it was also the governmental sector, the public sector economics. Public sector economy came into being, and in this way we found a rise in the employment level of industrial workers. With a rise or with an expansion of the market, we found also a rise in the wage level of industrial workers, and that was doubled, or that was added, or that was decided through their dearness allowances, because this DA system had started right after or right from Second World War in the in our colonial economy. It had started, and still in the second 5-year plan onwards, we adopted the same theory, and we still continue with it, the DA system. And there are many economists who feel that no, this is the major issue of inflation, because cost inflation contains a lion's share out of this DA. And so they even advocated for a complete stoppage of DA, though this was not politically advisable, and this was never accepted in India. But in some countries outside India, this DA was delinked from wage rise or from wage decision. But in India, what we find, the public sector, expansion of public sector units, and all such institutions where there was intervention by the government, the DA system continued, and wage decisions were monitored by wage boards and other agencies, and it was all based on DA. And so this is not an issue again to be repeated, but what I mean to say here is that wage inflation, wage push inflation wage spiral inflation are some of the very special features of inflation in developing nations like India. And therefore, we can discuss that the collapse of public sector units was also now. Therefore, what happens after 1991? There was a need to review the economic situation because most of the public sector units in India became sick or became less competitive. And therefore, the new economic policy invited actually LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization in order that these are the several issues in inflation theory. And if there is any difficulty, I will explain in the next classes. Here, since I have got a chance to teach you or to talk to you, I'm not teaching, actually, I'm talking to you regarding the theory of inflation. And so I want to just emphasize only one thing, that for the students or for the teachers, inflation is a very complicated issue. And uh, any single segment cannot explain it fully. It is correlated with many aspects. If you catch one aspect, you will find that the another aspect is also correlated at the same time. So it has to be explained in a broader spectrum. You cannot explain it in a compartmentalized analysis. This is not a separated analysis from, suppose the monetary aspect is not separated or it is not completely isolated from the non-monetary issue. What I was talking about inflation, now I can explain it that this is also a psychological aspect of behavior of the masses, behavior of the entrepreneurs. It is also related to the psychological behavior. Now, suppose why the governments are trying to emphasize for, suppose, such packages, large packages of money lending, because they find the production or the employment or the income levels are very low. Why? Because the situation is such, due to this pandemic, we find that there was or there is still lockdown in the economy in the entire country, and so the people are living in a chaotic condition. And only yesterday I was hearing the news in TV about the RBI measures. The RBI is again trying to implement some monetary policy, and the repo rate changes, as you all know. All these things, the EMI issue is also there. So what is this relaxation? This is all to create a situation of hope, because due to the outbreak of the pandemic, there is some sort of pessimism in the economy. This is a complete, not complete, but partial disequilibrium in the psychological aspect also. And this has to be corrected. And this can be corrected through the fiscal measures. So inflation is not only a monetary issue, a non-monetary issue, it also involves some fiscal measures in times of crisis like this, corona crisis, corona pandemic crisis. So this is a very widespread situation all over the world, and all the countries are facing pessimism in the economy, and all the governments are side by side trying to create optimistic or optimism in the economy. through the inflow of credit and other measures, repo rate and other measures, in order to create a situation when productivity starts, employment begins, income generation begins. All such measures are studied in the in this theory of inflation.